Hey guys, welcome to the spot. Caps here with a new video. MOP Prot Warrior, Mastery, Hit and Expertise Analysis. Let's get into it. The first thing we'll discuss today is Mastery and the cap associated to it. Then we'll get to Hit and Expertise and analyze how to balance them with Mastery. Now, before we even start, I'd like to point out that there's a lot of numbers here, but every one of them is detailed in the description below, so make sure to read it afterwards so you know how I got them. As you've already heard by now, Mastery in MOP has lost a bit of the awesomeness it had in Cataclysm because of the disappearance of CDC Cap'n, but this doesn't mean it's now useless in any way, far from that. It was even said in the beginning of the MOP beta that Mastery and block chance increase associated to it were very probably going to be receiving a diminishing return effect added to them. However, it seems Blizzard has decided to give up that idea after all, as putting block on a second die roll was already enough to prevent any tank from block capping. This gives an even greater importance to Mastery and puts it ahead of parry and dodge, which are still both affected by a heavy diminishing return even at low values. There are in fact two Mastery caps the Prot Warrior can try to reach, and only one he can actually hope to reach. The first one, or the soft cap, isn't really fixed and will depend on your dodge and parry value, but remains pretty close to 70% critical block or 14,000 Mastery points, and will be reachable with some 510 eye level gear. At that amount of critical block, the Warrior can hope to remain enraged 100% of the time, even with only one mob hitting him. Details of this is of course in the descriptions down below. The second cap, or hard cap, is at 100% critical block or at a huge 22,500 mastery rating, at which point every single block would be critical and so yield 10 rage points with the current enrage mechanics. Unfortunately, the Warrior cannot reach it, as it would require an insane level 630 gear, whilst by the end of the expansion will only be at some 530 eye level. However, this doesn't mean the Warrior cannot at least try to get closer and closer to this hard cap, and continuously increase his RPS and survivability through blocks and shield barriers. But in order to proceed as such, he would have to neglect Hit and Expertise just like he did in the previous Cataclysm expansion. And so the question becomes, is it worth it? Is it actually worth it, or does Hit and Expertise provide more survivability through a greater rage generation? Let's try to answer this in the next section. In order to know if it is indeed worth it to hit an Expertise cap, we'll have to first determine how much rage we'll actually be losing by neglecting them, and how much we'll be gaining by putting all of those stat points into Mastery instead. Hit in MOP is exactly the same for the Prot Warrior, with the exception that we only need 7.5% instead of 8%, or 2600 hit rating to fully hit cap. Expertise, on the other hand, has changed quite a bit, as bosses no longer have a 14% parry chance against a player with 0 expertise, but rather 7.5%. However, even at 7.5% expertise, level 93 mobs will still have this same 7.5% parry, and won't see any decrease. This is because they also have a 7.5% dodge chance, and in MOP, Expertise first removes dodge before removing parry. And until the mob's dodge is completely removed by your Expertise, his parry chance will simply remain the same. So even though he only has 7.5% parry, you will still need 15% expertise or 5100 expertise rating to bring him to 0% parry. This simply means that with 0 expertise and 0 hit, we suffer less from bosses avoidance than we did in Cataclysm, as bosses now only have a total of 22.5% avoidance instead of 28.5%. So this also means that with no expertise or hit, we will only be losing 22.5% of the total rage provided by Shield, Slam, Revenge and Devastate, but nothing else. We wouldn't be suffering from any other rage loss. So the question becomes, does converting 7,650 stat points, the amount of rating needed to hit an expertise cap, into mastery provides more or less rage than 22.5% of the total rage generation of Shield, Slam, Revenge and Devastate? It turns out that that amount of mastery is actually more or less equal to 22.5% of the rage provided by those attacks. However, since mastery also directly provides survivability through blocks and critical blocks, in the end it is more valuable as a survivability stat than hit and expertise. No kidding, you might say. Well, it wasn't that obvious, so I preferred crunching some numbers to make sure of it before assuming anything. As always, you can check those numbers in the description. So does this actually means that in MOP hit and expertise are gonna be just as neglected as they were in Cataclysm, and people are simply gonna be stuck in mastery once again? Well, not necessary, because a new factor is at play. With almost no hit and expertise, your rage flow would be a bit less predictable, even though you might still have the same RPS overall thanks to a higher critical blocks percentage. So in some situations where predictability is a win factor, and at the same time you are not getting that much critical blocks because your opponent is mainly a caster, for example, or has a very slow swing, hit and expertise will turn out to be pretty interesting and even more than mastery in those particular situations. So it will sometimes depend on the fight itself. In most situations, however, it will simply depend on your personal gameplay, whether you like your rage flow to be more predictable and controllable, or a bit more passive but less predictable. In any case, keep in mind that if you do decide to go for mastery, you would indeed be getting a bit more survivability through blocks and critical blocks, and so purely survivability wise, in most situations, mastery will be the way to go. Unless, of course, Blizzard decides to nerf something and change things before it goes live. I'm personally gonna hit cap, so abilities like Demoralize and Shout don't miss anymore, and neglect expertise whenever possible, and stack mastery with the rest of my stat points. But it really is a personal preference rather than a set in stone priority, so do take some time to check out those numbers I provided and see what optimization would be the most appropriate, suitable for your own gameplay. Okay guys, that's it for now. This concludes the mastery, hit and expertise analysis. Again, I hope this was helpful in some way. Feel free to comment, like, share, subscribe. As always, thanks a lot for sticking around and see you next one.